Okay. My name is Richard Vonder. I'm the president of North Iowa Beekeepers Club here. So that's Madison Rowe back there. She's our secretary. And Vanessa, she's going to be our club queen back here right now. So if you got any questions or anything about it, just ask one of the three of us here. We can help you out. Everybody, I think, gets signed up for the door prizes and raffle drawing. The $1 for the door prize or for the raffle drawing. That goes to kind of offset not having membership dues is what we do there. We kind of raise a little money that way, kind of a little offset a little bit, so that kind of helps out. The door prize stuff, anybody can bring anything, anytime they want. It doesn't hardly have to be bee related, as you can see. If you want to just bring something you had in the house and you just kind of need to, I don't want to sit around anymore, and just bring it up and drop it off, you can, and bring it when you come.
Will you have food to feed my wife if I drop her off?
Drop her off? Well, we've got a few cookies over there, a little coffee.
Gosh.
If anybody has a door prize that you'd want to bring in for a door prize, get a hold of me. We have a gal that has, I think, a nice, I don't know if it's a quilt, I forget the measurement. She sent it to me, but I haven't been able to get in touch with her to get it from her yet, so maybe next month we'll have that. It's a nice little quilt that was made, so one of these next couple months here, that'll be our door prize for that. So hope everybody's got their bees ready for winter now. So how you guys doing on yours? All ready to go? So mine are all tucked in and ready to go. So here maybe towards the end of the month, I did here in early November, mid-November, I did oxalic acid vaporizer on them, killing mites. If I get a nice warm day here in December, I might do it again just kind of keep knock them mites down. You know, right now they're pretty well mostly exposed now. There might be just a little brood in there, but I'd say most of it's out of there. So if you can just knock them back one more time, and maybe towards spring again, maybe again. So anything to do to help out. So okay, does anybody have anything you got to bring up before we kind of get going here? Kind of not much going on here. So I got to talk to Pat yet. Last year we had our auction, our North Iowa Beekeepers Club auction. I think it was on the 23rd, I think April 22nd this year is probably maybe the date, but I'll confirm that with Pat yet. We'll have our club auction, I'm sure, again. So, and then maybe the following month, we always did we did a field day. And instead of a Tuesday, we'll be going to a Saturday. That'll be probably on the 13th, but I'll get together with Pat. But if you got any items you want to sell on the auction, just kind of get them ready to go, and we'll be bringing that out here probably after the first year. We'll kind of get going, towards a couple months, February or so. We'll kind of get a list going and get stuff going on that if you want to consign something. So, but that's kind of up and coming here for what's going on. So, if anybody is interested, last week we had the county extension office come in. I got some papers back here. If you want to go back, you can go back and look at last month's meeting. Madison, you posted that all. Yep. So if you're interested in something like that, it's basically insurance on your bees is what it is. So you can do like per hive, you can do like if you lose honey production, and there's like, she had about 3 different things. The one on your hive I think is pretty much free, just on your hives itself. But then the other ones cost a little money, but you got to get them registered. What would you say? Before it was January something, wasn't it?
January 2nd.
2nd, yeah. They have to be registered. So if you're interested in something like that, just go to your county farm service group, yeah, agency, and talk to them for each county that you're in, and that will get yours. You can go talk to them and tell them what you got, and they'll probably help you out. Like you're in Minnesota, I think they probably have something up there too.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you a question quick. I just purchased an acreage in Northwood, Iowa, so I can go visit that one there. But
yep.
Now I forgot my question. Too much pain to think. Do you have inspections, like bee inspections in Iowa?
Yeah.
If they come from Minnesota into Iowa?
No, just if I have.
Oh, inspections? Yeah, we have a couple of people. Andy Joseph,
Yep.
He's our main inspector, and there's a couple other ones that.
So I need to call him before I bring the bees down, I'm sure.
You can get an inspection done through the state of Minnesota that will allow you, that we would recognize in Iowa, or you could have them inspected after you brought them, but typically you want them done prior. But either way,
Gotcha.
yeah, either way would be fine. But yeah, you'd call the main office and you'd probably talk directly to Andy Joseph, and he would come up and do the inspection for you.
I got his number too, or, you know, we thought it was
Yeah,
his number, so.
I've seen him on the thing there.
Yeah.
I don't believe Minnesota has an inspector.
I would be surprised if they don't, but I'm sure they're limited on, you know, you'd be being on the furthest south border,
Oh,
you know,
maybe
they might
around
not
Twin
get to
Cities
you, or they might have somebody on standby that's just not very active, that they would just on as needed basis, but typically the USDA has someone stationed in every state just because it's a, it can be a, livestock pathogen, you know, whatever,
Sure.
crossing borders, they wanna make sure everything's kind of all tip-top shape.
So for you, I would go to Northwood if you're interested in this, and go talk to them in Northwood, wherever they're, I'm sure it's probably in Northwood itself, because I'm sure that's a local, but if you're interested in something like that, you can go in and before January 2nd, and talk to them, and if you're interested in something like that, so. Since you have an acreage bought down there, and you don't have the bees here yet, but, you know, you have to have it by January 2nd to be covered for
Gotcha.
that year, so. So that'd be something you might wanna look into, so.
Is theft covered or,
Well, theft,
or that would go on to homeowners maybe?
I don't think so.
I don't know, it was more like weather-related
Yeah, it's like-
damages and
yeah.
stuff like that, you
It's
know.
probably the ELAP program,
Yep.
I
Yep,
think,
yep.
so it's just an emergency livestock assistance program, so
Oh,
it'd be like natural causes like tornado or high wind or flood.
Oh.
And then
You're down in Iowa, had that you had that derecho, if you took your hives out, that
Yeah.
you're covered, you know.
they'll also cover colony collapse syndrome too, so, but they don't cover like theft or neglect or anything like
Yeah.
that, so.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's the biggest thing I'm worried about is not living there. Just having somebody-
So you're just gonna bring the bees down but not live there?
Yeah,
Okay. Well, like my beehives, you know, they're tucked away, out of sight, out of mind. If you don't know they're there, you can't see them, you know, type of deal, so that's where mine are, so. They'd have to go looking for them to find them if they,
yeah. My biggest,
Fine.
the house has been, well, I should have shut up. The house has been vandalized several times, so
oh,
I'm assuming that somebody knows what's there.
yeah. So, like I said, for anybody who watched the video, if they wanna get in on this yet, you got less than a month to get in there and signed up, so. So I just wanted to bring it up one more time, so. At that, we're gonna just get started here. Tyler Holton from Holton Homestead is here with today, so we'll let it up to Tyler, so.
All right, thank you. Like Rich said, I'm Tyler Holton Homestead, and not always known, but Holton Honeybees. Sarah spoke here at the club last year, kind of talking about, you know, the business side of beekeeping, selling honey and marketing and all that stuff. That's kind of her specialty. And we've actually kind of split the business a little bit. Sarah, you know, kind of runs the homestead part of it, and then I have separated the beekeeping side of it, kind of make the paperwork a little easier. So my pollination, my honey production, my bee sales, and all that stuff kind of go under the Holton Honeybee side, and then we can kind of see what happens better with better focus on the retail side of selling honey and products like that. So there's us. So started, I would say we started keeping bees in 2016. I had zero desire to be a beekeeper. Sarah mentioned to me one time that her dad and her grandfather both kept bees together, about 100 or so hives in the general area that we live in now. And for Valentine's Day one year, I thought it'd be a great idea. Now that we finally moved to the country, that spring, I decided to buy her 2 hives, 2 kits, 2 packages, and I was like, here's your thing, you know, I'm not interested whatsoever. And we got that started. Sarah unfortunately broke her foot at that exact same time. I was ready to get started beekeeping, so I had, you know, to install the packages and all that kind of stuff. And when we went to go pick up the bees, we drove to Spring Valley Honey Farms in Perry, Iowa, and they run about 6,000 hives. And that time of the year, most of the bees are right out front of where they live or the shop and all that stuff. So just driving up, and I was just blown away by beehives as far as you can see, and I think that's what did it. And so I got hooked right away. I pretty much stole the beekeeping from Sarah altogether. She does get out and help me every now and then, but we kind of have our focuses. We're better suited. You know, she's much better at what she does, and I think she would agree that I might be a little better at what I do. So, again, beekeeper by accident. I was working full-time, a career for about 10 years, and I was successful. I made a lot of money and all that stuff, but I just wasn't happy. And so it just kind of came to a point where I decided if I'm going to work really hard, it should be something that I want to do. And so quit my job, kind of by force. It was a mutual decision that we just weren't going to work together anymore. And instead of continuing in my industry, which was collision repair, I decided that I'm just going to focus on trying to be a full-time beekeeper, which sounds insane, and it really kind of is and was. So I took a seasonal job, extremely low-paying seasonal job, but it gave me the winter off. And ever since I started beekeeping, I knew that almond pollination was something that I would love to do. It's like the Super Bowl of beekeeping, and it's a big part of my business plan with beekeeping. So I had the opportunity to get the winter off. I reached out to a few people and got a job to work in California, January 2019, from January till April. So I worked in the almond pollination there, which is, I worked for a broker, they are the middleman between the almond growers who need the bees and the beekeepers all across the country. So my job that year was to basically take possession of the bees, unloading them from the semis, putting them right into the almond orchards all across the Central Valley of California, and then when the bloom was over, we would do it in reverse. Go out into the orchards, pick up the exact same bees, gather them all up, load them on the semis, and send them back to their owners in multiple states. When I got back from that, I was technically unemployed. I really wasn't going to go back to my seasonal job because it just wasn't that great either. And I just so happened to go back to Spring Valley, where it all kind of started for me, and they offered me a job as like I'm technically the foreman or manager or whatever you would call it. I guess there's no official title, but we currently are anywhere between 4,000 to 6,000 hives there, and I personally have about 200 hives now. I focus on honey production, but I also have started selling nukes and queens and might dabble in a few packages depending on how the year goes. So I do a little bit of local pollination, pumpkins, melons, some apples, blueberries, but nothing really significant other than California almond pollination. So also, here's another about me. A lot of my beekeeping just comes from being hard-headed, and everybody told me I shouldn't quit my job, keep bees, or somebody told me I shouldn't do this or that, and I just found myself doing it anyway. So this talk, I want to just kind of show you some things. Like one of my big things with beekeeping is like you just kind of observe. The bees do their own thing. We're just here to make key management decisions. We also need to realize like what are we looking at and what does it mean. So here's some of the things that I like to look for that help me make decisions. This is also just a really cool picture, but you can see, this hive here is more darker colored than this hive. So what does that mean? Well, it doesn't really mean much besides it's a really cool picture, but this, I would willing to bet, is an Italian-based queen, however pure she is, and that would be like a carniolan. So just kind of observing that, I think it's pretty neat, but at the end of the day, what else do you see different? Probably nothing at all. And so don't get sucked into the fact that like, oh, I live in a cold climate, I really need a carniolan queen, or oh, I don't like to feed my bees very much, so I need a Carniola queen, or this queen came from a cold weather state, so I really needed to make it through winter here. None of that matters. I mean, I think these were all started at the exact same time, all had the exact same care, and it won't matter. So even me as a local Iowa queen producer, I would tell you that Iowa queens mean absolutely nothing. I'll sell them to anybody in the country. I'll buy queens from South Georgia or Northern California, and it won't matter because the beekeeper makes the right decisions based on what they see. So if we're going to be practicing our observations of what we're looking at, we'll just start from kind of the general basics and kind of work on that. So when we're looking at a frame, maybe this isn't your first time looking at one, but I think we have somebody in here that doesn't have any bees yet, right? So this is a good example too. So the structure of a hive, when you look at the frame, this is the top left corner of a frame. So just imagine it's like this. They'll always put honey, then pollen, and then start to rear their brood like that. That is a perfect example. Like that's what you want to see almost all the time. Now what happens? What do we see here?
Pollen.
Just a load of pollen. We still see some honey in the corners. Well, that one's brood up in the corner, so that doesn't seem right. This has got some honey in the corner, but like, holy cow, look at that brood. So something's not quite right. I don't know if it's bad, but if we look at this and say, if we know this is what we're supposed to see, but this is what we see, what's the first thing that comes to mind? What's missing in that one?
Bees?
Yeah, no brood. So to me, I would want to be like, that's interesting. Maybe there's no queen, because what happens is the bees use this pollen to make brood. They feed the brood that pollen. So if we have an excess of pollen, that means they have nothing to feed. And if they have nothing to feed, it's probably because the queen isn't laying or isn't laying very well. So, but that doesn't always mean it's a bad thing. It's just something I should be looking further into the hive for. This one, we can see that there's some cap brood up in that corner, but we don't really see any stages of young brood or anything like that, so maybe we need to investigate further. But having a lot of pollen can be a great thing. It can also mean that there's something wrong. These bees are working hard, foraging for everything out there, but they don't have something to feed it to. It's actually kind of rare to see this much pollen in a hive because pollen is almost hand to mouth. The bees store most of it in their gut, the nurses, and they're constantly feeding brood as it's coming in, and so when they have an excess of it, that's actually kind of rare. So this would tell me, if I saw this in the first couple frames, I would say, maybe this queen isn't keeping up, maybe there's something wrong with this, or the location that I'm at is just a massive amount of pollen, and maybe I should figure out a way to trap this, or I need to swap these frames out with some space for the queen to lay. Now, this is a good example. I don't know, some people say they can't find eggs. Maybe you need glasses, contacts, laser, eye surgery. It's kind of hard to see these eggs, but I tell people it's like the tiniest grain of rice you've ever seen. It's not always important to see this, but it definitely is a huge tool. If you can find this, you can almost eliminate 90% of your inspection time in each hive. Because as long as I see one of these, I know that there's a queen in there. Now, does anybody know how long an egg stays in that stage before it becomes a larvae?
3 days.
On day 3, it'll start to hatch from that stage to a larvae. So just because I see this only tells me that the queen's been there roughly 3 days. But some of these, if you see an egg standing straight up, that's like 24 hours. And by day 2, it's laying down. And in the middle of day 3 or so, it'll be a larvae. So you can almost work backwards. If you see larvae, you keep going until you see one even smaller and smaller, and pretty soon you'll start to see eggs laying down. If you keep going, you'll start to see them stand up. That is something I feel like is very, very important. But if if you're limited on site and everything like that, you'll have to work around it. So we've identified eggs. Can anybody see what finding eggs like this means? What about this one on the right? Or, yeah, whatever, that side. What do you think's going on there? Tons and tons and tons of eggs in there. Any guesses?
Lane worker?
That's definitely possible. I just found this picture interesting because if you look hard enough, you can see like even the comb is different. It's just the thickness of the cell walls is extremely big. Not really sure what's going on there because a laying worker would kind of look just like that, but it could be because of the deformed size of the cell, but typically a laying worker, so a queen, their abdomen or their tail section is extremely long. It's so she can reach all the way to the bottom of the cell. A worker can't. They kind of dangle their feet and they can't reach, and their tail can't touch the bottom, so typically they'll lay an egg on the side of the wall as far as they can, or it'll fall off and hit the side of the wall. I'm still guessing that is what's happening there, because if you look a little further up, there's some on the side of the walls up there, but because I think of this deformed thing, it's just for some reason targeted a whole bunch of activity there. This right here, I'm not seeing any stuck on the side of the wall though. So what would you imagine is happening right there? Multiple eggs in a cell, but still perfectly down in the middle. Any guesses?
Sometimes a young queen will do that.
Yeah, a young queen. She's just so anxious to get her job done and make sure she does it well. She'll go back to the same spot. And she's not quite sure she did it right. She's not quite sure she did it right. So, just because you see multiple eggs in a cell, maybe look and see if they're stuck to the side, or if you know that there's other evidence in the hive saying that it's a young queen, that the fact that there is capped brood is also a good indicator that this hive isn't possible to have a laying worker yet, because a laying worker develops at the absence of brood for like up to 5 weeks. So it takes an absolute long time for the last smell of any kind of brood to be present in a hive for a laying worker to emerge. So typically multiple eggs in one cell does not automatically mean laying worker.
So that mean it was a newer queen?
Yep,
Because
just
they're
getting started. So, because of just the capped brood would kind of tell me that it probably swarmed. And so all of hers, they're fine. And that's when you'll see a new queen starting to lay, is right as the last bit of brood is about to hatch. You're like, oh man, this hive's doomed. I've been waiting for this queen. Still not here, still not here. Bam, you'll start to see that. Just a little bit of capped brood left. It's just like perfect timing. So this is probably my favorite beekeeping related meme in the world because it's absolutely true. Only 12 hours and a half of a day. So going back to that first picture of honey, pollen, and brood. Does that check all the marks right there?
Yes.
Yep. Well, this is just not capped quite yet, but this is all fresh, wet nectar, honey. You can even see it smack in the middle of all around here, but there is pollen, there's brood. What do you think could be a problem, or what other information can you gather from that frame right there?
Spotted brood.
Anybody else? Wild guess, throw it out there. What could be a problem with that frame?
Space.
That's on the right track. So, you can't really see it maybe from up here, but you can see that there's just like droplets that have flown out of the frame even from me setting it down. So, the idea that this is shiny and not capped, and all up in here says that there's a honey flow going on, or I'm feeding them too much, and that they're desperately out of room because it's coming in, they can't find a spot, and they're shoving it where they shouldn't put it. That's just because it's like a madhouse. They can bring it in all day long, and they're just in a hurry. And the fact that it's very liquidy means it was within the last 24 hours. Has anybody done what's called a shake test before? Take the frame horizontally just like that, And if you just give it a light flick and you can see it come out like water, that means it's from that day, and that means there's a pretty good honey flow going on. So that too much nectar coming in, probably time to put on a honey super or whatever the situation is. Maybe it's ready for its second box. That could all be dandelion or whatever. But what do you think is happening? What do you see on this frame? Looks pretty good. That's a big old brood pattern. But what else do you see?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing, which is very, very bad. Because this hive can starve. I mean, it could have a massive population. These bees all hatch and there's nothing to feed them. So these two hives, you know, it looks good at first, but if you peel it apart and just kind of look, you can find what to do next. Same thing here. What do we see on this frame? Not quite. Anyone else? Kind of the same as the last slide, just you can see, you know, the brood is getting a little smaller, and there's honey and there's pollen, but now there's more honey, which, you know, that kind of breaks that rule of honey and pollen. So if they start pushing this in here closer and closer and then filling all these empty spaces, that just means that the queen's going to have less and less. Every time a bee hatches, a worker comes in and fills it full of nectar. How long until that hive swarms or is honey bound or whatever? So to me, seeing just an abundance of nectar where it shouldn't be and every available cell starting to get full, I lean more towards some sort of space, whether it's a second box or a honey super, depending on time of year. Kind of the same thing here, although it looks like we're missing pollen, but you can see now this honey ring is really starting to come around, and none of it's capped yet. So to me, that says that it's coming in pretty hot and heavy. Not all the time do we see pollen. That's less important as honey to be like observant of, because like I said, a lot of it is stored in all of the guts of these bees. If you've ever accidentally squished a bee and it's got like the orange color to it, you know, that's not always species. That's more likely pollen in their gut. So if you've ever watched Randy Oliver's videos, he will squish a bee, a nurse bee, and it'll either be clear because it has nectar, or it'll be orangish because she's got pollen in her gut. So pollen's not necessarily a big deal, but to me, this hive has, or this frame tells me that there's a lot of nectar coming in. And does anybody know what's going on right about here? A little bit, yeah. So it's hard to tell in this picture, but you can see that this is all smooth and one height, but these are actually sticking up. Does anybody know what that means? It doesn't necessarily look like the cell is bigger, but do you know what it means when they start to pop up like that?
Queen starting to lay unfertilized eggs a little bit.
Yep, so that means that the queen somehow got confused or is damaged or something. It's not very repeatable, so it could be something in the comb that makes the difference, because the queen has the ability to decide whether she's going to fertilize an egg when she lays it or lay an unfertilized egg. And an unfertilized egg is always going to be male, so that's a drone. So right there in those areas, something told her, or she wasn't able to control, maybe she didn't have any semen to deposit at that time. And so to me, that is like that puts a little note in my head saying, if I start to see more and more of these, that means the queen is maybe starting to have issues or running out of stored semen, because the queen only mates one time in her life, and we can't tell visibly if that's going to last forever or not. Same picture here. We've got a frame. It looks like we got honey, we got some pollen, but who can tell me what's happening here? Any guesses? You can kind of look at the top of the frame to get a little bit of more perspective on what is actually happening, but that's a frame with a lot of bumpy cells. They're not, they're not flat. Kinda. It's half right. It is technically a drone, but what kind of drone?
Laying worker?
Yeah. So remember, a drone cell is a large cell, and it's gonna just be a bigger one. But when they're bumpy like that, that technically is still a drone-ish, because that's an unfertilized egg. An unfertilized egg in a worker cell. So this is all a worker size cell. You know, it's the same cell they use for pollen and honey. But when an unfertilized egg gets laid in it, a drone won't fit. So instead, because a drone needs to be wider, instead, to make up the space, they go taller. And so they'll just pull that out and then cap it over. But what happens is those are all, because the queen or these workers are laying, and since these workers have never been fertilized, they don't have any stored semen, they can only lay unfertilized eggs. And so that hive was either a failed queen, poorly mated queen, or whatever. It doesn't really matter, because the end result is that hive is gone. It's not salvageable in that condition. So that could be a failed split, that could be a failed walkaway split, that can be a number of things. But usually it's incredibly spotty like that, because the larva might even die before it even starts to develop, and these workers will pull it out because they know it's not right. But you can really start to see, it might just be the angle of the frame, but you can see them starting to poke out a lot more up there versus being nice and flat against these. So
Is there a reason why it would be spotty?
it's just because I think the brood dies. They don't know how to care for it. They know it's not right. They don't feed it very well. They kind of get stuck between being a laying worker, which isn't just one, it's multiple in a hive. And so they know the hive is kind of doomed. They're just kind of just stuck. And I think because the larva is not quite right to begin with, that it dies halfway through maturity, so only a few of them make it. Here's another good side view of what I'm talking about with the bumpy, the popcorn looking cells. You can see right there how they stick way up versus what all the flat comb looks like. Now that we're talking about bad brood or whatever, here's some pictures of what you might find on a sick hive. Some of these things can all be, like going back to this, like we were saying, it'll be spotty because I think a lot of the hive is already sick, or they can't take care of it very well, or nutrition's poor or something, so it's always going to look bad. That'll be like the first telltale sign. But sometimes it can start like that frame of a perfect brood pattern, and then you see a few of those bumpy ones, and then the next inspection you see a few more, and then pretty soon then it'll look like that. So you sometimes get a little warning, but this right here, this disease is what we call sac brood. And why we call it sac brood, one of the telltale signs is that all the little larvae in here, it comes to a point. We call it sac brood because this, as it's developing, as the larva is developing, it gets like this mucus or membrane on it that encapsulates the larva, and it like pulls them super tight. And then this right here is an example of Foulbrood, American Foulbrood. And what we normally see done is like the toothpick prick test. You go into this cap larva and stick a toothpick in it, kind of squish it around a little bit. When you pull it out, the nasty that's in there, which is dead brood, which died because of the spores, will come out ropey, stringy. But what you can see is these cells right here. This is a frame held up, like the top bars at the bottom. So we're looking at where this would be the bottom of the cell if we were holding it upright, but it's hard to see, so we flip it upside down and look. this is what's called scale. So this is like the sludge of what these dead larvae look like in here. But what's left there is called scale. And American Foulbrood is a spore, bacterial spore, and or a fungal spore maybe, something like that. But it lives in the gut of the bee, and it will kill the larva once there's too many of them, and it spreads rapidly through food, and bees feed each other and all this kind of stuff. But it'll wipe out a hive, but not right away. So it can actually perpetuate and spread it very rapidly. But one of the telltale signs is that these spores stay. One of the only ways to get rid of it is by fire. So most brood comb, that's one of the reasons why we do state inspections, crossing borders, or like for your guys' auction coming up in the spring, that any comb should get looked at by the state inspector, make sure that there's none of that in there. It's very rare, but it's still out there, so it's always good to get any used equipment looked at, especially if it has comb. Now this right here is the more common European Foulbrood. So it comes and goes. It's very common in the spring because the bees are trying to get active, but sometimes it's a little wet and a little chilly. It can be kind of stressful on the bees. This is mostly a stress-induced disease, but it is bacterial, so it can kind of be fixed. Sometimes it can be genetic, but most of the stuff we see is just stress-induced spring when the bees want to raise a lot of brood, gets super cold at night, or lack of forage coming in, so they can't properly feed the larva, and so the larva gets sick. European Foulbrood is like a yellowing disease, so you'll start to see the different stages of the larva starting to turn yellow, and then they'll kind of just turn into a sludge. And this is pretty bad, but it usually clears itself up. If we get a really good dandelion flow, or we get into the summer with a good honey flow, it'll just like overnight disappear. So it's kind of one of those things where just really good nutrition and forage, or just kind of what happens in the spring. But if it doesn't clear up, sometimes that stuff can be traced back to the queen. So, all right, now back to the guessing game. What do you think's going on right there? Those are bees with their heads down in the cells. Some cap brood chewed up a little bit, but what else? What do we see on that frame?
No honey or no food source for them.
Yep, that right there is starving. The bees have their heads down in there trying to lick up any remnant of scent, smell, taste of honey. It looks like they've been probably starving for a while because they couldn't even feed this larva in here very well, and they all died, or they cannibalized them. When bees are desperate for protein, or any kind of food, they'll start to eat their larvae. They usually don't. You can see this all chewed up in here. They were trying to get at those, but they probably realized it was too much work. So that's definitely starving. What do you think happened here? There's just a big pile of bees at the bottom board.
Overwintered it out.
No, this is in California during the almond pollination. So they went into the orchard looking great, and then they look like that.
I can't think of the word. Spray.
No, not spray kill. That is also starving.
What?
Starvation. Yeah. So what happens in a hive is when this right here, you can see some live bees kind of crawling around. That's probably like 10 minutes away from being a completely dead hive. This right here, when a hive dies of starvation, they die almost all at the same time, because as a communal hive, they will spread one drop of honey between as many of their sisters as they can, and they pretty much all die at the same time. So that hive was a pretty big hive, and something happened where they were robbed out, even though it doesn't really look like there's any evidence of that, but something or other happened, they just didn't have enough food at the time, and they would just, basically like you pulled the plug on a robot, they just stop what they're doing and fall. So, if you ever see just a bunch of dead bees on your bottom board, it's more than likely from starvation. Oh yeah, here we go. Another great one. Okay, more.
Would a pesticide kill, would the bees stay in the box or would they be gone?
They mostly die of pain and agony, so you see them out the front. They know they've been poisoned and they know they're hurt pretty bad, and they crawl out the front. But with the starvation one, they just kind of drop to the bottom board. Sometimes you'll see them kicked out the front if like they're getting actively robbed, but there's nothing to rob if they starved, or like a mouse might kick them out if it's something through the winter. But okay, so more observations here. What do we see on this frame?
Swarm cells.
Yep, we see swarm cells. We got 3 that are uncapped, but definitely being worked on. And if we look down in them, you can see the larvae. And then we see at least two, if not 3 or more, that are already capped. So that hive is, if it hasn't swarmed yet, it's about to swarm. They say, rumor has it that if they cap that cell, it's pretty much game on that they're gonna swarm or have already swarmed. The problem is, if I didn't see those open ones right there, which are probably only a day behind those, you wouldn't really know how long they've been in there. Because they cap it relatively soon, and then you got a few days before it emerges. So people always assume that they're going to be able to tell if there's a huge population decline with the swarm, but it's really not true. What do we see on this picture right here? So that's a hive tipped straight back. That's my go-to way of inspecting the hive, because like we see here, I can get right into the meat and potatoes and see how many swarm cells there are and everything like that. So I'll explain that in a little bit. But what do we see right here? Anything pop out to you?
They built comb into your feeder.
Yep, there's comb in the feeder. And then what we see here, there's a little bird comb, but nothing crazy. What about here? Lots of bird comb here. Lots of bird comb here. But can you guys see what's in here? Do you see the shininess of it all? That's all honey. So what does that say? There's just a whole mess of honey right in the middle of the hive. What do you guys think that means?
Ran out of space.
Yep, they're using every little inch and nook and cranny they can, because I don't have a honey super on there. So I'm missing out on all that honey by not having a honey super on. And so they're using the bird comb in between the boxes and probably under the lid and in my feeder, all that stuff. So to me that says, holy cow, I need to put a honey super on that today. Otherwise, it's probably going to look like that. Swarm cells. Speaking of swarm cells, what do we see here? Technically these are swarm cells, but these are mostly called swarm cups. Practice cups, do you see how they're just kind of like perfect little dainty, and then we see those which are starting to be elongated and capped. What do those mean? Anybody?
Could be nothing, so somebody just let them make them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And what about over here? We see one. These aren't really it. I don't know what those are. Those could have been long ago ones or old swarm ones, so disregard those. But see, we got one starting here. But what do we see? What do we see here? What's all that?
Drone.
Which is normal. That is also just, you can see that's a larger size. These are all larger size drones, but it's also just because it's the bottom of the cell. They make those a little different. But you can see more drone right there. Now, the number one thing to look for pre-swarm urge the bees will make an exceptional amount of drone brood. So even before they start to make swarm cells, they need to have the drones first because they're going to leave behind a queen that needs to be mated. So to ensure that they're going to get that queen mated, they raise a lot of drone brood. So if I have a clue like, looks like they're flexing their muscles, practicing to see if they know how to make a queen cell. There's no egg in there, so I guess I shouldn't worry that much, but you can already see a bunch of drone brood here. Let's just imagine this is the same hive, bunch of drone brood here. In my mind, this hive is ready to swarm. So I need to start to make some decisions for the future. Should I split? Should I add a honey super? There's a lot of possibilities, but recognizing what's going to happen next by looking at the hive. Now again, almost all these pictures I took as I'm doing inspections, and how I normally do my inspections is just kind of how you're seeing it. And this might work for you guys, it might not. So this is the front of the hive facing me, and I'll take my hive tool and I'll open here. And usually I leave the lid stuck on here. I don't like to take my lid off very much because it ends up falling. Anyway, so this is how I do my inspections. I'll smoke the hive back, get the bees out of the way, get the bees out of the way here, and it looks like you would squish a whole bunch, but remember, there is space between here and the top of the bar, bee space. That's how they can make this burr comb in between. And so I will rest it pretty much like that. And so I'm able to walk around it and take my time, and sometimes I don't have to pull each frame out and risk rolling the queen. I can go like this. I'm not really looking for the queen. I can sometimes look between here. These plastic frames flex enough that I can look. And then if I need to do a further inspection, then I can take the box off and dig into it and all that stuff. But I'm able to feed it. I'm able to apply a mite treatment if I want, a pollen patty. I can get a bird's eye view of the top and the bottom. Really what I'm looking for is if I see capped brood, to me that's good enough that I know there's a queen in there. The population looks good compared to the rest. Not really worried. I want to look for swarm cells and practice cups and stuff like that to let me know, like, should I split this? I can look in this hive and see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 5 frames of brood in the top box of this hive, plus all these drones and practice cells. That hive really needs to be split. You know, that hive has plenty to steal from to make a new hive and knock the wind out of it to keep it from wanting to swarm. So, okay, what's going on in that one? That is a nuke I let the weeds grow up over all summer and totally forgot about. But what do you see?
Put a lot of honey in there.
An absolute mess. That is probably like 2 inches tall, comb, just solid honey. Same thing here. This was an early split. Dandelions or something took off, and they'll do the same thing. They'll stick it to the lid. They want it out of where the queen lays as much as they can. But that's all wasted honey. That should go in your honey super.
So what you're saying is Sarah should have put a super on there a long time ago.
Yeah, somebody should have. So yeah, when you see this, time for this. Time to go out and put your honey supers on. Same thing. So if we're talking about honey and when to put a honey super on, this is too late. Now let's talk about like getting ready to do it. What do we see when we look at frames like this? This one and this one. What's the common picture here?
A lot of new white comb on there.
You see how they're pulling it way out past the top bar? Like it's coming way out. Even here, they're starting to pull it way out, and it's fresh and white. That's because they're looking for more space. They'll make their combs deeper and longer just to get more in there. What about here? what do we see? That's burr comb up there, but what looks different about it than regular burr comb?
In the white tips on the end of the bird comb.
Yep, if we look here, we see all this frosting, and then we see here, they're frosting it and they're extending it. That goes to the exact same thing we were talking about. They are looking for more room, because that will turn into that. You see how that's kind of the same? Look at this hive. See all that bird comb right on top of the top bars? That is that. Before there's a problem. So if you see that, but also look at your calendar. You know, for me, like I need to start looking for this around June 15th, depending on how the weather's going, if it's typical or non-typical. If I start seeing this around June 15th, I am doing this way before this happens. This is too late. You might never get them back on track and they'll still swarm. You want this, if not sooner. Because you can see that they're already starting to do it. And a lot of beekeeping classes, you might start your top box with all foundation or whatever, and then there's the 75% rule where you want like 75% of that filled out or used before you add another box. I don't believe that's true when it comes to a honey super. The honey super comes on like as soon as you see that. They will still start to work that comb in the top box as much as they can, because they're more than likely going to need to work on foundation in that honey super also. So if it's your first year or adding another box, your second box has foundation and your honey super has foundation, I do not agree with the 75% rule. That usually only applies for deep brood boxes, when to add your second one. When it comes to honey supers on, put it on early. It's your choice whether you want to use a queen excluder. I don't like using queen excluders for honey, but if you can manage this extremely well in your apiary, you won't need honey supers, because the honey will start to come in so fast that the queen can't get up there. There's a thing called a honey barrier. Most times they respect that. The queen won't go above a honey barrier. So these, just like we looked in that first picture where that top ring of honey gets made, pretty soon the queen's not going to want to cross that. If all of these up here get a nice honey ring, she's just going to stay where she's at. Or, in worst case scenario, they start to overfill this with honey, and she'll get squished down into the bottom box and start laying brood again until they start putting it up in the honey super. So you can almost use that honey ring as your queen excluder, but if you are worried that she'll lay brood in your honey super or anything like that, you can try a queen excluder. But I believe, in my experience, using a queen excluder and you have foundation in your honey super, you're not going to want to cross this just to work that. So you might, put this on to start, or put it on after they've started to work your honey super. Some people will slide it back just a little bit so that the bees can get by, but the queen typically isn't going to come all the way to the edge of a frame to move up anyway. Some people might do it like this. I don't use these. I sometimes get brood laid in my honey super, but if she does get up there early, the rest of the season, as those emerge, they'll just fill it with honey and she goes right back down. So if you time this wrong and you just throw a honey super on with no evidence of a honey flow happening, that queen's just going to imagine it as a third brood box and lay the whole thing up. So be observant of the white frosting and the whiting of the cells, and you should be just fine. Now here's a picture from a good friend of mine, Dylan. He runs the company Ag Pollen in Towner, North Dakota, which is almost to the Canadian border, and they make honey like crazy. So you do it right, you're in the right location, and you time your honey supers right, you don't need a honey super. None of those have honey supers in it, queen excluders, sorry. Now for the good stuff. What do we see here?
Wax moth.
That is wax moth damage. There are two kinds of wax moths, and they both suck. Most of what you see here is probably the larger one. Really doesn't matter how to identify them. But they can make an absolute mess, so definitely guard your comb. This can happen in the summer, in the fall, if you have a weak hive that you're just not sure what to do with and you close the lid, come back later. The wax moths are probably already in there. They're like vultures waiting for a hive to die. They won't kill your hive, they're just waiting. And even with stored comb, if you don't keep an eye on it, don't keep paramoth on it, they like the dark brood comb, but once they get infested like that, let's say you have all your honey supers stacked up, and maybe there's just one dark comb in it, or in the room you have them all in, this infestation starts, they have no problems destroying a nice, white, beautiful comb. So anything with pollen in it, they're super attracted to. So it's typically brood comb, but they can get into almost anything, anywhere, anytime. Yeah, so got a super high cat, just like the mite levels, and then this snow globe is mites. So don't be that beekeeper, don't be that cat. The whole point of that is mites are not just in the fall. Mites are in there all the time, no matter what you do. And so we have the opportunity from spring until our first honey super goes on to take care of them. So like I said, in my area, I just need to keep an eye on it June 15th-ish. So it's in your best interest to monitor your mites and deal with them before your honey supers go on. That gives you the best opportunity to take care of them when your honey supers come off. A lot of people have issues in the fall or late summer getting their mite counts under control. It seems like their mite treatments aren't working, but it's because your hive is completely infested and no amount of mite treatments can knock them down very fast without them just coming right back. So take advantage of the springtime to do some mite cleanup and some mite control right before your honey supers go on. There are some options for honey supers on. Like formic acid can be done with the honey supers on, but it's very temperature sensitive, so it doesn't typically work for us in summer. So, but yeah, I would just keep an eye on that. Looks like I'm out of slides already. So, any questions so far? I know we kind of blasted through there, but
I know, Tyler, you talked about, the frame, they'll start putting honey in the brood boxes. I do know that because, Pat and I taught a class at NIAAC, and we had a brand new foundation on that one. And this will happen if you're new, I don't know you, and it happened to me too, my first year.
yeah,
Is you get the brood in both boxes, and you're okay, put the honey super on.
they won't
The
go
next
up.
day you come back, it's all full of honey in the brood boxes. They won't even hardly go touch that honey super.
Yeah, so that's a very common thing. It really depends on your honey flow. If it's like extremely strong, the bees have no problem drawing a bunch of wax on something brand new, and they'll go up there and do it overnight. But if it's like coming in waves, trickle, not the greatest weather, they're like, it's too much work to go up there. We'll just start pounding it in this top box. That's what it's there for. And it can just cause a whole lot of problems. One thing I've slowly been implementing over the years is if you guys, what I recommend is maybe when you pick your honey extractor, or maybe your club has one, find one that has the capability of fitting a deep frame in it, because one of the things that can happen is if this does get honey bound as your second box, you can extract it separate and feed it back to the bees. You just need that open space, so you can put the combs right back in, open, the queen can use it. Or what I like to do, even in my own apiary, is run a deep box as my first honey super, because what can happen, especially if you want to use a queen excluder, is if your hive is already starting to make honey. Let's just say I come in here and I find 1 or 2 frames with some brood in it, open and whatever. I'll swap it with 2 foundations for my honey super, put my queen excluder on, and put this in here and put that box on. What that does is it forces the bees to walk through that queen excluder to take care of this brood. And then they'll just realize, oh, this isn't so bad, we can walk through this all day long. That brood will hatch, get filled with honey, and now they know what a honey super is. And so you can, let's say you run all mediums for your honey supers. I like to, it's a lot of work, but you can under super it. Put this honey super under here, put this box back on. So they're gonna have to walk right past all that empty to get to where they were working on. They're gonna be like, wow, this is a lot easier, let's just work this and do it. So it's a lot of work because this can get really heavy, but you can also just keep stacking it up that way. And that's one way to get over a honey-bound hive. Or what I like to do is, if you're planning on growing your apiary, having deep comb drawn out, like this was used in a honey super. Even though there's not a lot here, I probably spun out a tiny little bit of honey. This is going to go into brood splits next year, and so it's just a good way to get drawn comb done, because it can be hard to get them to draw comb in a brood box. It does slow them down. So even if they get them started just a little bit, I'll either put them back in as a honey super or just add it to my brood boxes next year. So I brought this stuff. I want to show you guys, if you've got a few hives or you're going into your second year and you want to split your hives, I brought some stuff because I want to show you one of my favorite ways to split hives. And maybe you've seen a demonstration before, because I'm sure Pat Ennis does the same way. So let's put this all together real quick.
Thought you mean under the table.
No, this will be fine right
Okay.
here. So let's imagine we're coming into spring, made it through the winter, we've got a double deep. Double deep just like this. And it's time to do our inspection. What I would do is, I'd tip my hive back, I'd look in here, I'd look through the top, I'd kind of look through the bottom, mostly just the top. So I'd see I got honey, 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 brood, 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 honey, whatever. As long as I see that there's at least, if I took 2 frames of brood out of here, I'd like to see 1 or 2 more in here. And if I didn't, I'd kind of take a peek down here for cat brood. All I'm looking for is cat brood. And I see that this hive has 6 frames of brood between the 2 boxes. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I'm going to split this hive. I'm going to fill the feeder, maybe give them pollen patty, close this thing back up. If I would plan to do a mite treatment, now would be a decent time to do that too. And so now I'll take the top box off, or the lid off, and I'll come in here and I'll see I got honey in here. So this is off, and I brought with me, this is the exact same setup as my first bottom box. So I got my feeder, and this has 8 frames in it because I have a 2-gallon feeder. If you have a 1-gallon feeder, you'll have 9 frames. If you don't run an inside feeder, you'll have 10 frames in here. Either way, the idea is that you want it set up like your bottom box, because we're going to be making a new bottom box out of this. I want to take probably 2 to 3 frames of brood out of here and probably 2 frames of honey. I'm just making a small nuke from this into this box. So I'm going to go ahead and take out, if I have drawn comb, it's good to use whether you're going to put it back in here or leave it in here. The idea can be that this hive is strong and has population, and I'm feeding it, so I could put some foundation in here for them to work. And if I had some drawn comb to accompany the drawn comb I'm going to take out of here, that would be beneficial. But if you start off with all foundation, it's not really going to matter. But if it's drawn comb, you can sort it the way you want, like leaving it in here versus putting it in here, whatever. So we'll start our inspection here. Typically the outside frames have honey. This one, let's imagine, is completely full of honey. I want that one. Put it on the outside because just kind of how we looked at the frame before, honey on the outside, pollen and brood. When we look at a hive completely, it's usually honey and then brood. and they'll put the pollen in between. But like mostly when they have a surplus of honey, it's always on the outside 2 frames or so. So that's, we're gonna replicate that to make it easy on the hive. I'll come over here, here's my second frame of honey, looks great. I will put it where the honey goes. Now let's go, since I know where the brood is, typically, I'll dig right into the middle. This one, mostly cat brood, I'll take that. Keep digging in here. This one's got all stages of brood, 75% covered, has some pollen on it, I'll take that. And then maybe I'll look for one that has like pollen and brood and multiple stages. Doesn't have to be a full frame of brood. Put that there. Now I'll replace all the frames that I took. Same order. Typically anything that has, now I'll resort this, so like I'll put a honey over here, so now I'll balance on both sides. Foundation will go in the middle where I think the bees will most be. Any drawn comb will go in the middle so the queen can just get right back to laying. So this hive is all put back together. This hive is all put back together. Now, this is the only reason I use queen excluder. The reason we're using that is because I don't want the queen. I'll back up. I missed a very important step. So every time I took a frame out of here, I shook all the bees off. Every single one of them. So, like I said, we'll start it over. Found the frame I wanted. I want no bees on it. 0. Shake them off. I can look one more time, make sure the queen isn't hanging on. Then I'll move it into this box. The whole point is I want to leave the queen in here, and this will ensure that she stays in here, because now this box has the brood and the honey and the food, everything the hive needs, minus the bees. Well, now the same idea that I said about making this your honey super, because the bees will come up to take care of the brood. Now the population you need, the perfect amount to cover the brood, will be in here. I'll come back tomorrow morning or tomorrow evening, it doesn't really matter, and take this hive off, set it right here, add a queen, and now I have 2 hives. This hive will be functioning in about 3 to 4 days when the queen is released, and away we go. You can
How
move these.
soon do you add the queen?
I'll do it right away.
You do?
Yeah, that's
As
what
soon as
the,
you take it off, put the queen in.
I just can't afford to come back a second time, because not all my bees are in my backyard, so plus that gives the hive 2 or 3 days to chew through the candy. They're going to realize that their old queen's gone, and they're already going to start. I'm sure there's a better way to maximize, but I put them in right away. If you have time, you can wait 2 or 3 days, but you also want to go back in there and cut those queen cells that they're going to be starting, whereas if you add the queen right away, I've noticed they don't start making cells at all. So, and then the original lid will go with this hive, and I just bring one, when I take this off, I bring one more and put it on here. And so now you have 2 hives. And you don't have to like take this one apart only to put another box back on it. You can just keep doing this. And then like 2 weeks, you want to check this one again. Sometimes that's not enough to take the urge out of this hive, and you might need to split it again. There are ways where you could do the exact same thing, shake all the bees off this second box, put the queen excluder between, and then just take this one off. And you'd almost have to put 2 boxes on it right away. But there's a million different ways to split hives. I brought this is something new I've added to my apiary. I've been trying out. This is what's called a double screen board, because it has 2 screens, one in each side of these holes. Some of these you can buy are screened the whole way. The importance of having screen on both sides is, in the same fashion that we took this box off, we can, maybe for the sake of space or to experiment, or I'll show you the benefits of this, put this hive right back on. We still took the queen excluder off, the bees can't touch, but those holes in the middle allow this hive that generates a ton of heat to share heat for here. This is really important for really early splits in the spring when it's still cold and rainy up here in northern Iowa. a lot of European Foulbrood happens because of splits just getting cold at night, not enough bees to cover the brood starts to die or stressed out. Bees can't feed them if they're clustered. So what this can do, you'd still add your queen. This has an entrance on the opposite side of this entrance. What also this allows is when this hive is up here, any bee that's ever flown before, which is probably an older forager, those are the ones that are going to decrease your queen acceptance rate by a lot because they're angry and grumpy and they recognize their queen. They're going to fly out of here and be like, well, that's not my home. They're going to fly right back in here. So all you're going to have up here is the nice young nurses that are going to accept your queen, and they're going to have all the heat they need. You don't need a lot of bees up here. So you can wait, the 16 to 21 days or so. You can check your queen in here and make sure she's out. You can let them expand their brood nest a lot, sharing this heat. Let this get really well developed by day 21. You should know that that queen's good. Then you can take this box off. And another really cool trick would be you move this hive down the row of your hives and put this one right smack in its place. All of the foragers from this hive are going to fly right into the entrance of where this one's now sitting. And so let's just do that. I'll move this down the row a little bit. You're not going to hurt this hive at all by losing some foragers in the middle of the day. This hive is rip-roaring. You're not even going to know any different. This one, still nice and young, but the honey flow's coming and we want to make honey. So now all those foragers are going to fly into here. This has built a pretty good population so they can defend their own. These bees aren't really going to fight. And they'll come in here with a bunch of goodies that they foraged. And now this hive is going to be boosted up big time. And we'll put a box on it. And now we're back to 2 double deep hives. And now another thing is if they didn't accept this queen, if this was still in this configuration, we added a queen and for some reason she's not good. Maybe this was our walkaway split. Maybe we put a swarm cell up here to see what would happen. And we check on day like 16 to 21 and it's just not any good. Dang. Well, we can just take this off, put it right back on, and we're good. Or you could try again. Just do the whole thing over again. Pull some brood up, put the queen excluder in, and try it again. So these things are pretty cool to have because if you come across a swarm cell, that's probably the best queen you could ever make. So you might as well, if you had extra equipment, you can try putting it above a hive and just seeing what happens. It's pretty handy. This is almost like identical to a bottom board. This would be your entrance. 2 screens, a rim. I've been using them. Bob Binney kind of turned me onto that idea if you guys watch his YouTube videos. Another thing I brought with me that I think is a lifesaver is what's called a platform or a drip tray. This kind of looks like my lid, but it's really just a flat sheet of plywood with a rim on it and 2 feet. And it accompanies this 2-wheel dolly. But this 2-wheel dolly has a larger foot just so that it has a lot more purchase on the bottom of these. These are amazing to have because just like bringing all this equipment here, I use the same thing for honey supers, equipment, lids. Almost nothing in my bee shop gets put directly on the floor because you have to move all this one at a time over to this side and only put it back. So if everything gets stacked on one of these, then anytime you can move as many honey supers or lids or anything out of your way as you want, because just get it out of the way here, slide it out, grab another one, you can stack all your stuff up nice. What's really nice is if you're going to treat your empty equipment for wax moths, you stack your stacks up and you can move them out of the way or move them out to your yards to air out. You don't have to have the rim, but the rim on the bottom, especially if you use wood glue or decide to caulk it, this is a rim on the top of my lid, but it's the same idea. When you stack your honey supers on here, they always drip. So you can keep your honey house, your garage, or your kitchen floor clean because you stack all your honey supers on. You can move them right up close to your extracting line, and all the drips end up here, not on your floor. So they are indispensable, and even though I have a forklift and everything I have is pretty much palletized, I use this thing a ton. Makes bringing everything to your truck or in your barn or garage or whatever just incredibly efficient. And all my honey supers go on them when I pull them too, so you can kind of keep them in the back of your truck, pull your honey super off, set them on, you can slide them in your truck more, set another platform down, grab another one, stack them up, super, super nice. And anything else? Any other questions?
Talk a little bit about, you know, if you got a weak hive
Oh, yeah.
and a strong hive, and what about swapping?
Kind of the same idea as I said about setting that one hive off to the side and then replacing it with a stronger one in the middle of the day. That is something I use all the time in my bee yard for like nukes or splits. If one split has just a huge population and the other one has a good queen, good brood and everything like that, but the population's just not there, instead of like trying to move frames around and hope I don't move the queen, sometimes in the middle of the day I'll just pick up the weaker one, put it exactly where the strong one was, and move them, and the bees will just equalize. They'll just fly into the other hive, especially if there's a honey flow or generally good bee weather going on. It doesn't necessarily work that good in the fall, but all through the spring and summer, the bees just come in. You know, in the fall, there's guard bees and some fighting and robbing season, so they're kind of hesitant to let somebody new in. But you can swap spots in the middle of the day to your benefit, and that way you just don't risk accidentally moving your queen, because then now the hive's in big trouble. So I do it with nukes. Big hives are harder because it's a lot heavier and a lot more work, but if they're in your single as a split or a nuke box, it's pretty easy that way. Anything else?
I have a two-part question.
Go ahead.
Goat head, now you're calling me names.
Yeah.
When you have it on your pallets, which way do you flip the box on your forward pallets?
So I just, as I'm facing the hive, I tip it back to me. So on a 4-way pallet, there'll be two, just like this. I just still tip them just like this. So there'll be one here, and then I'll have to walk to the other side, and that'll also get tipped just like
The
this.
same.
Yeah.
And then when you have the swarm cells on the,
Yeah, like right
on
here.
there,
Mm-hmm.
are they ever on the bottom box?
No, typically not. Almost never. There's not much room at the bottom, but almost always your swarm cells will be right here from the top
Between
box
the
down.
two.
Yeah, that's why that's important. And that's why I keep the feeder in the bottom too. It's because I open the hive anyway to do my inspection, so it's easier to feed. Some people leave their feeder in the top, but I must just be extremely unlucky. But sometimes they don't always eat their syrup, or there's rainwater that'll get in there. And so when I tip them back, it ends up all over me and in my boots, so I don't do that anymore. And I just don't like having lids fall off or having to handle lids 2 or 3 times. So I leave the lid stuck on there and the feeder just in the bottom. Plus, the hive starts with a feeder, so it should just always stay at the bottom, in my opinion. Oh yeah, that was a 2-part question. You had a question?
Oh, yeah. When do you start doing your splits?
April, and second half of April, beginning of May. Kind of is regional, so I'm not sure if that would work necessarily for you. It also is more dependent on the hive. So if you start to do your inspections and you start to see that they're raising a lot of drone, and you start to see some practice cups, or the weather forecast doesn't look so terrible at night, because it's the nighttime temps at that stage that you kind of want to be weary of, especially because Iowa can sometimes have fall, spring, and go straight back into winter. That can really suck when you have splits. So that's
That
another
did
reason.
last year, we had a good early start, and we had, what, 3, 4 weeks of cold,
Yeah,
and
that's,
the hives just declined.
yeah, the brood rearing almost completely stopped from what I heard. That's also why kind of having some of these double screen boards are nice, because you don't necessarily have to take them off, and they can share the heat a little bit. It's a little bit of a risk management tool, but really just depends on your hive. If their practice cups are going crazy, if they've got more brood than you think they need, like if they can afford 2 or 3 frames of brood and some bees being pulled out and it won't harm anything. But I typically see it probably more so around May, but I've had it happen as early as like April 15th if we're just like head first in the spring, maybe even skipping spring and straight in the summer. So anything's possible, and no 2 years are ever the same, so you kind of just have to see what the bees say.
What's your treatment plan?
I try and mix it up a lot. I've used Apigard, Apivar, formic acid, oxalic acid, and I think they all kind of have their place. Really, you just need to know where you're at in your bee year, like how much time do I have before I need to put a honey super on, how much time do I have before I think winter's here. I think formic acid has a good place. It can be kind of scary because it's a really strong acid and it can kill your queen, and so that's not what you want. But I found that if you do the 1 strip at a time, there's an option where you can do 1 every 10 days or 2 for 21 days or something similar. Without a doubt, 2 strips for 21 days will kill your queen or cause negative damage more times than it will ever help. I mean, it will absolutely kill your mites, but you're also basically starting over. So formic acid 1 at a time works. It's more labor intensive, but I think it does a pretty good job. And I think people should follow up within like 2 weeks to make sure the mite counts just didn't shoot right back up. But I think the 2 formic pads spread apart does a really good job at doing that. And then oxalic acid, whether you do, there's like a dribble, which is like a liquid solution. There's the vaporization, which works pretty good. Now, some people will tell you, Rich and I were talking a little earlier, that you should only do it when you're 100% broodless. Well, I'll tell you that it's almost impossible that some of my hives are completely broodless, and I would bet you that if we took a lot of people's hives apart, you would also find the same thing. There would be like maybe something this big in there. But beekeeping isn't perfect, and neither are we. So when we're weighing the options of, do I treat them to hopefully knock out quite a few mites? Absolutely. So I think it should be changed to less brood, not brood less. So all the winter, we have less brood than we ever have the rest of the year, so we should be using that oxalic acid vapor at that time. Whatever works for you. I think that stuff works really good. You can do that in the winter and in spring coming out. They have those oxalic acid extended release. They're like a chamois or a sponge or a towel that is getting some research done on it that I think work pretty good when the honey supers are on.
That's something new coming out right now.
Yeah, there's some people trying it. I tried it. That picture I posted of my friend Dylan with those honey super stacked way up, he's had good luck with them the last couple of years. Basically what it does is it just keeps your mites from accelerating in growth while your honey supers are on, which we normally see. We'll get them really low in the spring. All summer they go haywire. And when we get honey supers off, we're left with a huge mess, and sometimes the damage is done. This seems to keep the numbers steady, and so we don't see the damage, and we can really put a hurt on them with our post-honey super treatments. So
I have done a Formic Pro.
Yeah, there's
in like early July. I have done it with honey supers on.
Yeah.
Before they get stacked too high.
Yeah, it's probably better, like as you're putting your first one on, it's probably still really effective. because you could probably even put it on the top instead of having to put it in between. So, but yeah, like you're saying, if it gets stacked too high, it's probably not gonna do very much. And it's just more work to take all your honey supers down and then put them all right back up, so it's too heavy for me, I only like to take them off once. Any other questions about anything beekeeping related?
What do you, like if you have 200 hives, what would you expect for general loss in the spring?
Probably, you mean going through winter or like from spring to fall?
Well, with me, winter's the worst,
Yeah,
but, like one year I had almost 50% loss. I mean, I lose like 100 hives out of 200.
mhm.
And then it seems like I'm always trying to catch up in the spring to get that 100 back. You
Yeah,
know what I'm saying?
that's beekeeping in a nutshell, but I think we were kind of talking about that ELAC program. I think the national average right now is like 22.5%. So like ELAC covers anything over 22.5% that fall under their categories of like, typically that's for colony collapse syndrome. So, and that's mite related. So they figure the national average, if you did everything necessary to keep a hive healthy and alive, but out of your control was colony collapse disease due to mites. 20, anything under 22.5 is acceptable, normal average. 22.5 would be pretty nice some years when you have 50 or more. I mean, I'm definitely not a perfect beekeeper. I probably lost over 50% last year. And there's just, and you don't really know what it is exactly. So it's just one of those things where you gotta keep, I really do think it's mostly just a mite control issue. Keeping in touch with them during the spring, and then as soon as the honey supers come off. The problem before was that your honey year could be short or long, and on the long years, it's just compounding the problem with the mites just being uncontrolled and unregulated in there. One other thing I think, and there was an article saying that queens live significantly less than they ever have than 10 years ago. Like, I think the average is like a queen living 10 months, which I think is a little short, but I've definitely had years where you could almost go over to my pile of dead outs and I would know exactly that those were all queens from the last year. So it could have just been a natural decline of the queen where it wasn't bad enough to where they replaced her on their own, or if they did a bad job at it or a failing queen. So it's one of those years where, like, if you, let's say one year you make 100 splits, so you have 100 old queens and 100 new queens. Well, you might lose 75% of those old queens just to being old and failing along the way. So you're left with your 100 new queens. And so next year the same problem happens. You have 100 old queens that are destined to fail more than likely in their second year, and you're only left with about 100 good ones if you get all your queens, you know, at 100% success rate. So there's a lot of beekeepers that are starting to requeen on a schedule, everything, and they seem to be having a lot of good luck, but that's a really hard practice to get into, and I haven't figured it out yet either, so.
What recommendations would you have for selling honey? I have like 900 jars of honey in my dining room, and I've gone to probably 30 farmers markets and just pay $20 for a table and sell $30 worth of honey.
It takes time. I mean, it takes a long
Well, my
time.
question would be is, like when I get back up to 200 hives,
I think if retail's not for you, which it's not for everyone, I would partner with like breweries or bakeries and start selling by the bucket. There's other beekeepers in your area. Like if I run out of honey, I buy some from my boss just because it's part of my, I mean, it's kind of built into my pay. So if I run out of honey, let's say like in the middle of winter, I'm not gonna get any more until August or so. So and then a lot of my friends that are larger beekeepers than me sell to other beekeepers that go to farmers markets. And it's all local honey still, and they have customers to fill. And a lot of the honey industry is sold to other beekeepers or somebody else who bottles it and then sells it, just like the stuff you see on the shelves. So I think instead of selling it by the jar, you're gonna need to move it in volume, or sell it to another beekeeper, or find larger volumes at a lower cost, but you're also eliminating a ton of inputs of like having to source your jars, labels, all that stuff. So I think like the average right now is $3, anywhere from $2.50 to $3 a pound, like in large quantities, like per drum, 650 pounds at a time. If you get to a larger scale, you can sell in the drum to other beekeepers. It's even easier that way. So you just got to find what works for you. Some people who don't want to make honey end up just making more bees, you know, splitting during your honey flow instead of putting honey supers on.
Right.
So
I do a lot of vendor shows and, you know, it just takes time.
yeah,
It costs you
does.
every show, but it takes your time to do it.
I'd say it takes like 3 years before you really start to like establish yourself at a farmer's market.
Can I speak up?
Yeah, she's the one that talked to.
I'm over here dying, sorry. So we had the same issue, right? You go to a farmer's market and there's probably at least one other person there selling honey too, right? So how do you stand out without it being a race to the bottom, because you don't want to be the person who's only selling because you have the cheapest stuff, right? So what we did, maybe this isn't for you because this is a lot, you know, then that's when we came out with creamed honey, flavored creamed. What else can we do with honey? But then on top of that, you're also having to teach people, okay, so now I have the Star of Mango Habanero creamed honey, what do I do with it? So it's a whole nother world, but if you are wanting to do the retail side of it and not the wholesale by the barrel side of it, you just know you have to spend some extra time marketing yourself and figuring out how am I different than the other beekeeper on the other side of the farmer's market, and what can I give to my customers that maybe they can't.
And another big thing is just if you and another beekeeper, you know, it's both probably relatively the same honey. You probably sell in the similar sizes, but what's going to make it different is like your story, your presence at the market, your marketing as far as like how nice and legible and eye attractive your labels are, your display. It takes a lot just to, because like Sarah said, it shouldn't be a race to the bottom. We should all be racing to make as much money for our honey as possible, because if we did the math, it's probably never going to be enough for us, and the bees work even harder. So it shouldn't be about discounting your honey just to get it sold. It's like, what more can I do? And when it comes to labels and jars and that kind of stuff, we're talking like pennies of difference, but that's what will make or break you selling versus someone else. A very eye-appealing label, all that kind of stuff. And there's people that specialize in marketing for that exact reason. Color combinations, font, all that stuff. You can go way into the weeds, but that stuff works. So
And don't be scared by the label. It's still something you could print at home
yeah,
to start off with.
yeah.
Usually that's where we differ. They don't, all they have is their name written on the jar.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have a really nice label. And
Yeah, it'll pay
Ingredients
off.
and-
It just kind of sometimes, you know, first year creep, second year sleep, third year leap is what Sarah's grandma always told us about how
You
things.
had it wrong though. It's sleep first.
Why would sleep first?
Because it's like calm and nothing
No,
really
I think I had it right. Anyway,
I do honey samples.
yeah, for
Yeah, she
sure.
does
That's
that.
great, just honey samples, and have you out there, and I do the pretzel and dip it in the honey, and
Yeah,
you know how many people will go by and they're just kinda walking by and, hey, like to have a sample of honey?
Right.
You know, and they dip it in there, oh, that's pretty good,
yeah,
you know? And if you get, out of 10 people, if you get one person to buy it, that was, one person that was walking by anyway, you
yeah,
know? That's what I
She even
figure.
sells honey caramels, or gives them away
yeah. That'll work.
to people as they come by. But anyway, yeah. The bigger venues, we sell a lot of honey. When there's people, you know, like a
Yeah.
bunch of people.
Yeah.
But the smaller farmers markets where, but then you feel bad because you're only going to their big one, you don't go to
Yeah.
all their little ones. Anyway.
I think it pays off too, because if you just go to the big ones, like you kind of have to serve your community too, and so people see that you're also out there at the small markets, and there are people that go to the small markets to support locally too, so I think you also have to be a steward to your own market and do your due diligence to bring more people there too. And you being there, one extra vendor, and maybe you start to know your community a little more and more people start showing up. And I think with honey sales, it's more word of mouth than anything, so even if you just inspire one person with a sample and they don't buy today, they remember your apiary's name or your name, and they'll tell their friend, and then eventually the next time they see you at the big show or something, and they bring their friends, then they're the ones who stop and buy. So it's not always the first time you see somebody. We've had people stop at our booth, and it might take them 10 times before they buy, and then they buy regularly. So
If I could just get you and Sarah to adopt me, then my last name would be Holton.
yeah,
And then I could sell,
yep,
Merchandising, you gotta get the hat with the cute little symbol on it.
yeah, there you go.
yep.
Something that Tyler and I always talk about doing, but we have never ever been organized enough to do it, so maybe you should try it. We always wanted to do like a tablet or laptop on our table with like a slideshow, because of pictures of you in the bee yard or you doing stuff, because again, it is all about the story, because we can all say that we all know, 20 other people selling honey, so how are you going to be different? Well, people want to know that you were the one doing it, that you were the one putting the labor into it. They want to know your story, they want to know all this stuff. Like whenever I go to shows, people will be like, you make all this, you do all this, and
Like
I'll start
you're the
talking about it.
beekeeper.
Yeah, and then I'll start talking about it, or I might teach them one stupid random fact, and they're like, wow, I'm so inspired, I want to buy everything from you now. And it's just stupid little things like that,
Because you have to turn it away from just like, my products are for sale on this table, to like, this is local honey from your area, or maybe their grandpa was a beekeeper or something, so.
Also, pro tip, the honey dipper. The stupid wooden honey dipper tied to your jar will probably raise your sales.
They want that, and then they'll buy
I did
honey to
that.
go with it.
And we have not sold one.
Really?
Maybe it's just Minnesotans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she sold $600 at the last big thing,
Yeah.
and not one of the, I had a bigger jar and a little jar. And I'll show you a picture when we're done. They were really nice. I mean, I did the tie with the,
Yeah.
what's that string?
Honey dipper
called?
right on it and everything.
Honey dipper with the little.
Maybe they thought that was just a display.
It's locations. It's
It's
locations.
gotta be
It's
locations.
Minnesota.
I used to have a jar of dippers out there, and everyone wanted to buy them, and I'm like, nope, they're free with honey purchase. It would make people so mad, because they just want the stupid dipper.
One thing too is, we were always $1 higher. What they weren't selling any either, but, there's just lack of people is usually the problem, but we were always $1 higher, and people would always say, well, they're selling it over there for $5 and you're at $6. And I say, well, yes, but I don't know how they extract their honey, but we extract our honey in a epoxy floor, FRP walls, ceiling, liquid tight lights, and clean environment. I said, we're not out in our garage with our tank top with sweat dripping in our honey when we're bottling it, and
Yeah.
so,
And maybe, there you go, put that on your slideshow.
yeah, there you
I mean,
go.
that's something to showcase for
They need
real.
they want something to feel relatable to the product they're gonna spend their money on, so the more you can give them for that, I think they're.
That we sell in a jar versus a bottle.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's part of educating your customer, because a lot of people don't think about, oh shit, someone could be sweating into my honey in their nasty garage with sawdust and oil and everything else, and like,
And
you
then
don't
put it on
think about
YouTube.
that.
Yeah,
Well, you're ready to raise your cost for your jars, just raise your price up there.
yeah.
If you had it in a plastic bottle, you could probably be at $5, but it's in your jar,
Yeah, and
you're
that's what
just a
you,
little higher.
and that's what you tell them, it's like, well, this is recyclable, like glass is like almost 100% recyclable, and plastic isn't fully recyclable. There's always byproducts and waste from recycling plastic, so it's better for the environment to be in glass, and it's just kind of paying homage to beekeeping as old as it is. It's always been in glass, so.
And unfortunately, being in the farmer's market, you're never going to not hear that, well, I can go to Hy-Vee and get that for cheaper. I mean, and we've already decided a long time ago, people that say that shit to us, like, you're just not our customer, sorry. Like,
And you can
and you just have to accept
Right.
it, and you're not gonna get
Those people-
everybody.
still will come back sometimes.
Well, that's why I had to buy acreage in Iowa, so I can tell people I'm from Iowa, because when I say from Minnesota, they
Yeah.
walk away right away.
Yeah, smart.
I usually do.
Thanks a lot.
What farmer's market, like, I'm just curious.
He's in Minnesota.
I'm
so-
from Minnesota.
No, I know, I know. I'm still curious. What farmer's market,
Just
like,
the
You know,
local towns,
like how big?
like Manorville.
nothing huge.
No, the bigger one, like Albert Lee,
Mhm.
already has 2 people, and they have a requirement
Oh,
that if you don't show up every weekend, then whatever you miss, you get dropped down a notch. And if you miss 2, you get pretty much, you're out
wow,
until they cycle you back in, and it's kind of,
yeah.
anyway. And
They're
I knew
forcing
it
you
to
to-
selling honey, because we usually just gave it all away. I mean, usually every year, 600-700 jars of honey we gave away.
Wow.
And, until the last 2 years, we just tried selling it.
Mhm.
But, anyway, but I figured dialing it up with the package and everything for Christmas would have, I told her, you're gonna sell them all, you probably take them all. She took them all and didn't sell one. And it was $1 more for all the fancy stuff.
Yeah.
And,
I always hear where you're from.
Austin,
No, I mean, when I'm selling.
oh,
Where you get your hives at? You know, I always hear that.
yeah, I had one lady tell me that, well, you're 15 miles away, I need to find somebody local, and I'm like, well, do I stand here for the next half hour explaining this, or do I just
Yeah,
let it go?
sometimes you just gotta let it go.
But, anyway,
Tough crowd.
Yeah.
yeah,
It takes time, especially because I think if you're the new person at the market, everybody's hesitant, and you just gotta keep at it and go.
As you keep going to it, they'll keep coming back, and
Yeah.
then the one that bought from before, they'll buy it again from
Sure.
you, because it's good honey, and they'll come back to you, and they'll come back to you, and it'll grow. And not every times I do it, not every week's the same.
Yeah.
You know, you could have, I do Thursdays on Main and Clear Lake over here, and one week I'll sell $100 worth, and the next week I might sell $400 worth. You know, you just never know.
I did find out that all the people that we gave it away to came every month to get some.
Good.
Came back every month?
Yeah, now that we're charging for it, we don't see them anymore.
Never happened.
Is honey ever too crystallized to save?
No, it'll always melt.
Okay.
Sometimes I've had it to where like the very bottom of the bucket or the barrel just has something like so dry it will never melt, but it's only just like a fraction of it. But it just has to be like that sweet spot of like between 110 but not more than 115. It has to be at that for it to actually start to melt the crystals.
Okay.
And stirring it up speeds it up without it getting too hot, and but anything less than that, it might look like it's melted, but it'll just crystallize right away again. So
I ask because everything we bottled this year, we stored in a heated shop that's heated to about 50 degrees.
50 degrees
Just so
actually
it
makes it
doesn't freeze.
faster.
What's that?
50 degrees will make your honey go faster.
Yeah. Oh, this stuff is like hard as a rock.
Yeah.
Like the bottles are, you can,
Yeah, rock solid.
Sounds
The
like
problem,
that.
that's
It's terrible.
also another thing is like the less space you give the honey. So like if I had a barrel of honey in the same exact spot as yours, it wouldn't crystallize. And then a gallon jug might just be a little hazy.
Mm-hmm.
You get down to a 1 pound jar, it'll be rock solid. So every time you make the jar smaller,
Yeah.
it crystallizes faster. And so typically your best bet is to leave everything in a bucket and bottle it like as your inventory starts to disappear, because then you can
Okay.
just liquefy it and bottle it. But the longer it stays in the bottle,
I think somebody might have told me that.
it's hard. It's hard to do because it's like, well, we have all these jars, we should just fill them. All this honey's
Yes.
liquid, we should just start
Yes.
filling them.
Giant boxes of
Yeah.
bottles, man. You have
It's
to fill
hard,
them.
but that's the whole reason why bottling tanks are invented, but there are ways around it. So keeping them in buckets and then melting your buckets, transferring it into a
Yeah.
bucket with a gate valve and trying that. But like 45 and 50 to 55 degrees is like what you need to crystallize honey. It'd actually be better if you just froze it right away and it just like skips that whole process. It's rock hard, but it's completely clear. When it thaws, it's completely clear again.
Yeah, no, it was probably, what, a month and a half? We didn't
Yeah.
see it, right? We come back to grab some and it's just like, what in
Sometimes,
the hell?
sometimes it's all depends on the nectar source. Some, like, for example, my friend in North Dakota, they go to canola or sunflower agricultural fields for their, some of their honey collection, and those will crystallize in like 7 days flat.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll crystallize in the comb if they don't extract it fast enough from the time they get it off the hive and they get it in the extractor.
Yeah, everything we had last year, none of it's crystallized. at all.
Yeah, it all depends. I
And
mean,
then
it's
Everything
crazy.
from this year.
Unless you're trying to make creamed honey, then you can't get it to crystallize, it's nothing.
Yep.
I converted a whole freezer into honey warmer, so it's
Yeah.
easy to do.
Yeah.
And
Just
that's
put a thermostat
the
control,
best thing.
Yeah,
100 watt
warmer.
bulb in the bottom, runs off that thermostat. Mine sits at 100, 105, I take a 50-pound pail, drop it in there about 3 days later, pour
yeah.
it into my bottle filling
And,
pail.
or they make like heated jackets, they're like a blanket for a bucket. Those work pretty good, but
I have a couple of them.
It worked pretty good.
Because of the bottom.
yeah, I mean, it's not perfect, but it'll work. Ideally, like just having even just some of that pink insulation, making a box that you can put a bucket in and like a ceramic heat bulb or something on a thermostat. You can get those like Inkbird thermostats for like $15. They have the on-off and I mean, it's wonderful. I use it. The same idea for a small to a large one to melt barrels of honey or buckets or even jars that crystallize. We swap them off the shelf and they'll go in the warmer.
And once it all melts, it all looks the same
Yep.
as it did before.
As long as you keep an eye on it, the longer you leave it in there, even after it's melted, it'll start to darken because it's exposed to heat. But like in 3 or 4 days, if you pop it open, it looks fine. Sometimes day 2 or 3, if you just shake the jar, because then it'll kind of stir itself. By day 3 or 4, it's ready to pull out for sure, and then you can put it back on the shelf. Ideally, you want to get rid of that pretty soon to someone, but regardless, it needs to come out of that hot box. Otherwise, over time, it will just slowly start to darken. You might not notice it right away, but if you had one on the shelf and one in the hot box, after about a week or 2, you'd be like, oh, definitely. Anything else? Anything on your mind at all? Do this all day. If you guys are on Facebook, there's a group that I made. It's not necessarily my page. I wish everybody would contribute a little more, but I do a lot of it. Iowa Beekeepers. Some of you might be already on there. I like to have a lot of fun on there. Some of those memes you might have seen on there before. So it's a good time, and we talk about just about everything and anything. And if there's anything on your guys' mind, I'd love to see you guys post on there. There's people that know way more than me in that group too. So, and there's people that are brand new beekeepers that are willing to learn. So it's always good to share whatever you see in the bee yard. Most of those pictures I take myself as I'm just messing around. All those videos I take on a whim, like I make a decision within a second to just open up my phone and talk about whatever I'm doing. So you guys could all do the same, and it's kind of fun. Thanks for having me. This was fun. Hope you guys have a good time.
All right, thanks, Tyler. Like I said, you just pull up Iowa Beekeepers, you can flip through them and you'll see a lot of Tyler's videos on there. I watch them all the time. I get a lot of ideas, and I passed on to Madison, about swapping boxes. I did that one time. Madison, I got this hive this little week. I said, let's just swap boxes, switch positions.
Yeah.
You did too, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah, it worked.
Did it work?
Mhm.
Awesome. And sometimes you can even swap them back. It's kind of, you can
Yeah.
swap them all day long if you wanted.
So I picked up a lot of little pointers that Tyler's put out there, so it works good, so. All right, okay, next thing we're talking about here a little bit real quick, or we've been going to last year, we tried, is meeting in the summer. And it didn't get a lot of people involved in it. It was harder. So if we're thinking about it again this year, but if we can find, we don't necessarily have to have speakers. We thought maybe summer would be great because that's when everybody's got their bees, that's when everybody's got the issues, and what about this, what about that? So more of a get together, talk about bees session. So if somebody wants to host a meeting at their place, throw a campfire out there, bring your lawn chairs and sit around and talk about bees and something like that. That's what I'm thinking this year, if we can try to do that. have some fun during the summer. And we'll pick a Tuesday night like we have been right now. We don't have to worry about the weekends and everybody's busy on the weekends. We'll stick with our Tuesday nights and we'll see what happens again. So keep it in mind. Anybody's thinking about it, you know, I said just have fun during the summer because that's when everybody's got the issues because that's when you got your bees and you go, oh God, I don't know what should I do with this, what should I do with that. Well, we can get together once a month and talk about it and maybe we can help you out. We also have the North Iowa Beekeepers discussion group, same thing as Iowa Beekeepers. If you have an issue, take a picture of it, throw it on their discussion group. One of us will try to answer it. If we don't answer it, we'll find somebody that has an answer and we can get back to you on that. So don't be afraid to jump on it. I've done some posting on there too, our discussion group page. So just get on there and throw a question out there and we'll get back to you and see if we can get an answer. And, you know, so it's kind of just it's something to help out, like Tyler, something to help out the other beekeepers. If you had an issue, show them what you're doing. Maybe that'll work for you, you know. So keep that in mind for the summer if somebody has something. So talk about NIAAC out here, North Iowa Area Community College. Okay, they're having a beginning beekeeping class again. They're putting on. I believe it's $55. Pat Annis is going to be instructing it. It's going to be all 4 Saturday mornings of February is when they have it scheduled. It's like a 3-hour. I think it's a 3-hour class, so it's every Saturday morning in February, and you have to go through NIAAC to get signed up for it. So, if that's something anybody's interested, or if you know somebody getting started, or you just want to go there, it's a great class. I took it my first year before I had bees, and I took it after I had bees again. So, just kind of a good refresher, learn about it. Also, Sarah Tweeten, we did, Pat and I taught the class at NIAAC we went through the summer. And I think she just messaged me here the other day, we haven't got together yet, but we're probably gonna be doing a summer class again. It's once every 3-4 weeks where we start in the spring, install the packages, have an hour in class, go out to the beehives. We still have the 2 hives that we had at NIAAC this year. I have them they're in my bee yard right now, so I can take care of them through the winter. But summer we'll go back over and we're talking about doing that same class again. It was very, very helpful for a lot of beekeepers. Some that had bees already, some that were just getting started in bees. So we talk about things, go to the beehive, like install the package of bees, and then you're new, so here's your package of bees, and now you go home and put yours in. Next time we have class, we talk about something else in the beehives, and then something you go back to your hives and check it out. So we're talking about doing that again too. So a couple of classes coming up. So that's kind of more of a hands-on, so in the summertime. So starting in the spring and going through, all the way through, I think it was October when we got done. So, and it's a business in beekeeping, so it's kind of how to make a business out of beekeeping. You don't have to have a couple hundred hives. I got 35 hives right now. You don't have to you can make a business out of 2 hives, you know, if you work it right. You know, you can sell a little honey. Next year, I got my 2 hives through spring, and I only want 2 hives. I can make a split, and I can sell a couple of nukes. You know, so there's another way to do it. So it's kind of teaching you how to make a business out of it. So, so something else to think about if you got somebody that's thinking about maybe interested in it or something like that. So we'll probably be bringing more information on that too. So next month, Dick Dosser Camp from Blossom Street Honey he lives down in the U Grove. He's going to be coming up and talking. He is also our District 6 for the Iowa Honey Producers District 6, which is our district here, representative up here. So he's going to talk a little bit about the Iowa Honey Producers. And I think this year things are going to maybe change on the districts a little bit, the way it kind of talked maybe. So hopefully he stays there as our district director, but we'll have to see how that plays out. But he's going to come up and talk next week or next month. So that'll be for next month though. Okay, then anything else anybody got to bring up then before we kind of close up here? Nessa, you want to draw? We got the door prizes and we have the raffle drawing. So go ahead, Nessa.